Today we're going to talk about the tissue layers of the digestive tract. It's found in chapter 14 in your textbook, and remember the textbook pages are online since you don't have a hard copy of the textbook. So we are looking at the second definition worksheet that'll go along with this PowerPoint, and also pages 466 in your textbook. And you are to be filling in numbers 1 through 7 on that worksheet. There are 4 layers to the digestive tract, 4 tissue layers, and that first innermost layer is called the mucosa. So I'm just going to draw that innermost layer. So that's the layer that the food's actually going to touch when it goes through the digestive system. The second layer is called the submucosa, and we'll talk about what's in each of these layers as we go through the PowerPoint. So there's a second layer. The third layer is the muscle layer. That layer is what helps with peristalsis. And then our last layer is called the serosa. So we've got these 4 thin tissue layers that make up the digestive tract. The innermost layer being the mucosa, the one that's going to touch the food, and the serosa being the one that's possibly touching other organs because it's the outermost layer. So the mucosa is the layer that lines the cavity. That cavity, I'm just going to draw a little diagram here. So the mucosa is that innermost layer. The cavity, or where the food is actually passing through, is called the lumen. So the lumen is the cavity area. The mucosa, in that tissue layer, it does contain some mucus secreting cells, and those cells are called goblet cells. So we need those cells secreting mucus so that it reduces the amount of friction that would occur as food is passing through that cavity. If there's no mucus, then there's going to be a lot of friction, and food moving through your digestive tract could possibly be painful without those goblet cells secreting that mucus. So here we have a picture or diagram, and I'm going to keep coming back to this diagram in this PowerPoint, and we are talking about the mucosa. So I'm just going to box this out. So on your diagram, you definitely want to locate that and label it. It's made up of surface epithelium, lamina propria, and a muscle layer. You don't really need to worry about memorizing those. You could actually, in that area where those 3 lines come off of the diagram, you could just say that that is the mucosa, because I'm not making you memorize those tissue layers that make up the mucosa. So it's this innermost layer, kind of pink there, and then this area in here is the lumen. And so you'll want to make sure that you locate that on your diagram that you have to label in your note worksheet, and label that as the lumen if you have not done that already. Now the next layer after the mucosa is the submucosa. You should memorize these layers. They are important. The submucosa contains blood vessels, it contains nerve endings, it contains lymphatic vessels, lymph tissues. Lymphatic vessels and lymph tissues, they're a part of the immune system. We have nerve endings, obviously those are going to send pain or sensory things to your brain, and blood vessels. Because remember, all cells need oxygen, and those blood vessels are what's bringing the oxygen. It's also transporting other things, but we need blood vessels there to give the cells oxygen. This layer helps to regulate digestive activity. There's glands in this layer that also will produce mucus, and the mucus that they're going to secrete is going to be more of a basic or an alkaline type mucus, because it's going to protect the stomach from the acid from eating the stomach material or eating the stomach. So it's going to kind of coat the stomach, and it's going to coat really all areas of the digestive tract, but mainly the stomach is where those alkaline secretions need to happen, because the stomach is producing acid that has a pH of 1.5 to 3.5. So let me just write that out here for you. Whoops. So it has a very, very low pH, and so those glands are very helpful to produce that mucus to coat the stomach, so the stomach doesn't, that acid in the stomach doesn't eat away at the stomach lining. Now here, the submucosa is located right here. And so that's this layer right here. And if you follow the layer around, you can see the submucosal glands. Those are the ones that I was telling you are going to secrete that alkaline mucus. And it will go into the lumen area and coat that area so that there's no damage to the lining. And then also in there you can see the nerves, which are in yellow. Again, you don't need to label the nerves. I'm not going to make you memorize those things, but you can see that they're coming into that submucosa area, and they're the yellow looking vessels. And then you can also see that there's arteries and veins in the blue and red. So all those things are going into the submucosa area, and you can kind of see them all in there. So you want to make sure on your labeling worksheet that you have submucosal glands, mucosa, and arteries and veins and nerves. These three you could add there as well. And here they're pointing to a gland in the mucosa, so if you're wondering what some of those lines are, you can label that as well. So that is what you should have labeled from the information I just gave you on the last slide. Now the third layer is the muscle layer, and this muscularis externa layer has, in most areas of the digestive tract, it has two muscle layers. It has an inner circular layer and an outer longitudinal layer, and that inner circular layer is going to contract, and when it contracts, it makes the lumen smaller, so it narrows it narrows the lumen, and that lumen, remember, is the cavity or the opening that the food passes through. The outer longitudinal, when they contract, they're going to widen the lumen. So they contract and the lumen widens. So just add that in for you. Now there is something different that happens in the stomach, because the stomach is doing so much churning. The stomach has a third muscle layer that is smooth muscle, and it's called the oblique layer. And when we talk about the stomach, that will come up again. But just for right now, you need to know that the stomach does have a third muscle layer called the oblique. Now, these two muscle layers, inner and outer, when they narrow and widen due to their contracting, it causes peristalsis. So this is causing peristalsis. And again, peristalsis is those contractions that allow food to move, because remember we talked about yesterday that the food isn't just going to get to your stomach by gravity. It needs something to move it there. And so that's peristalsis. If you haven't watched the video on peristalsis on the class page, it's really short. I do highly recommend watching that, so you can actually see an esophagus widening and narrowing and pushing food through it to get to the stomach. So that's the muscle layer. And again, third muscle layer in the stomach. It's the only area in the digestive tract that has a third muscle layer. Okay, so let's take a look here at this diagram again. The next thing that you're going to want to label will be the muscularis externa, which is located where I just boxed out. And you can see there's two layers. We have the longitudinal layer and the inner circular layer. Inner meaning it's closer to the mucosa and submucosa, and then the outer longitudinal layer is towards the serosa, or that last layer. So that's the muscularis externa, and you should label that on the diagram in your note worksheet. The last layer of the alimentary canal is the serosa. This is the outermost layer. It's also known as the visceral peritoneum. And the visceral peritoneum actually covers most of the external surfaces of the organs in the digestive tract, and even other organs like your heart and your lungs. So this isn't just part of the alimentary canal. It is part of some other organs, and it's that outer covering of most of those organs. So we also have a parietal peritoneum. This lines the whole abdominal cavity, so it kind of holds all the organs in the abdominal cavity. And in between the visceral and parietal layer, there is a little bit of mucus secretions that kind of allow for no friction to occur when we're moving and things. If we don't have this mucus being secreted in between those two layers, it's going to really, it could cause a little bit of pain. So those work together to kind of cushion and give a little protection to those digestive organs. And then the last layer that is on the labeling worksheet, and it is something that we'll talk about if we get back to school this year, we will hopefully get to do the dissection, but the mesentery is something that's very visual when we do the dissection, because when you open your mink, that's like the first thing that you see, because it covers that whole entire area of the abdomen, and it holds the organs to the body wall. So it's attached to the parietal peritoneum, and it will hold all of the organs in that abdominal cavity. If it's not holding those organs to the body wall, then those organs could be moving around, and we don't really want that to happen. We want all the organs to stay where they are to keep them safe. They all have a job to do, and we need to keep them where they are supposed to be in the body. So the mesentery is super important to attach those organs to the body wall. So the serosa does contain a couple different layers to it, and so I have you define those on your definition worksheet. So that's all four of the tissue layers. Let's just take one more look at the diagram. And so there's a couple more things that I want you to put on your diagram. So I want you to label the serosa. So that's right here. And notice they all have it called the visceral peritoneum there. So that's the outer layer. It can be termed either serosa or visceral peritoneum. You'll see both of those words used. Then you can see up here they've kind of pulled it away from the muscle layer. And you can see that that is that inner layer of the serosa. Okay, the outer layer is going to be this mesentery. And they don't have parietal peritoneum located on here. And the mesentery and parietal peritoneum kind of work hand in hand and can also be one and the same. So just keep that in mind. They don't have it labeled that way here. And I don't even remember if your book says that or not. But they both line the cavity, and they're both kind of holding those organs in place in the abdomen. So that is the fourth muscle, or the fourth tissue layer, not muscle layer, tissue layer of the digestive tract. And that ends today's lesson on those tissue layers. And again, you want to make sure that you label your labeling worksheet and that you also answer the definitions 1 through 7 on the second definition worksheet that is located on the class page. I'll see you guys tomorrow.